Well, safety campaigners are demanding a national boycott of nightclubs until women's safety can be guaranteed after a rise in reports that women are being drugged by injection.
This is separate from drinks being spiked. This is actual scratching with needles. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has now asked police for an urgent assessment on the scale of this new problem after reports of more spiking incidents in recent months. It's on the rise. One 18-year-old was spiked after feeling a very sharp scratch on her arm while in a nightclub in Nottingham.
I was out with my flat and I'd barely been drinking at all, and I suddenly came over feeling very out of it, not really aware what was going on. And I went outside to get some air and my wrist started hurting, and I looked down at my wrist and I had a puncture mark in my wrist. So that was when it kind of added up that something had happened, because I was not in a good state at all.
And she's still in shock, really. We're now joined by Leah's mum, Karen, and Leah's older sister, Gemma, whose drink was spiked. Also by Michael Kill of the Nighttime Industries Association, which represents nightclubs and music venues, and by Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner Donna Jones. But Karen, I'd like to talk to you. This is every parent's kind of worst nightmare, isn't it? You know, your kids are out there meant to be having fun, and this happens. How much do you know about what actually happened to your daughter?
Well, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. The phone rang, and it's always that dreaded call as a parent when you know your children are away from home or out for the night. And she was in a real panic state. Luckily, she had some great friends who were with her and looked after her. And with the panic and everything, I just asked her to calmly and with her friends go back to their halls and to call an Uber and just go to hospital and let them help her. As I was over 2 hours away, there really wasn't much I could have done apart from that, really.
What were her symptoms? What did she say her condition was?
She was very panicky. She was very disorientated, scared. She felt sick, and just really wasn't Leah. She wasn't talking any sense, and she was just scared, really.
Did she have any memory at all of being spiked? I mean, was she aware of somebody coming up to her and sticking a needle in her?
No, nothing at all. It was a surprise to her. She had actually heard of this happening before, but as usual, you never think that something like that will happen to you.
But she knew it had happened because she found a mark on her, didn't she? Where was the mark?
The mark was on her wrist, on her right wrist here, right, as in the picture, and it was just really scary. It was a very scary moment. It was quite unbelievable because it's a vile thing to do, and as a mother, it was very scary.
Karen, do you know what she was jabbed with? Does Leah know? And does she know what substance was then injected into her?
No, she doesn't have a clue. She went to the hospital and there was no toxicology test that they could have done or anything. They just basically took some bloods and that was it, really.
Well, let's okay.
We don't know what she's been.
Because
what was on the needle.
It's obviously an absolutely horrible experience. It's also, Donna Jones, because you're the national lead for victims at the National Association for Police and Crime Commissioners. It's also a real concern about what is being used and in order to spike people this way, isn't it? Do we have any information about that?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that Leah's situation is absolutely appalling. I really feel for her, and how frightening when she has left home, gone to university with new friends, perhaps that she hasn't known for very long, in a city that she doesn't know. I think this is a despicable crime where people are preying on victims that are vulnerable because they are away from their normal support network. In terms of the drink spiking, as you mentioned earlier, that is an issue that's been around for a longer time. But in terms of the needle spiking, this is a really new and emerging issue. And in fact, yesterday, there was a meeting of chief constables across the country and they discussed this issue. It is very much an emerging issue. Now, when I got a briefing on this yesterday tea time, the only such report was that of Leah's in terms of being spiked by a needle that had been formally reported to the police. But what's happened now, because this has got national, obviously, coverage, is that more victims are coming forward. And so I think it's absolutely right that the Home Secretary is asking for this inquiry. I also think that the National Crime Agency and the National Police Chiefs Council being involved in this is absolutely key. In terms of what drugs are being used, I can only hazard a guess at this time. We just don't know. It is such a new and emerging issue.
Well, we've been told that we're looking at a range of potential drugs like Valium, otherwise known as diazepam, Rohypnol, Benzos, GHB, all of those are candidates. What I'm interested in is how this is being administered, because obviously all of us who've been for a vaccination, for example, recently, it's a big deal, and we know that we are having a needle put in our arms. Do we have any idea how the perpetrators of this monstrosities are doing it without their victims really being aware? How do you stick a needle in somebody without them knowing that it's happening to them? It's very odd.
Well, I think it's the circumstance. If you take Leah's situation, for example, being in a nightclub, people in close proximity to each other, loud music, it's a slightly disorientating situation to be in because of the noise and the darkness as well often. Yeah. And so I really think that the police working across the country with bars, pubs, nightclub owners, companies is absolutely imperative. And there is some really good work that actually does go on with, the nighttime economy companies across the country to try and keep people, particularly women, as safe as we possibly can. But these crimes are really abhorrent. And we know last year there was the conviction of a man in Manchester who was drugging men and taking them back to his flat. And in fact, he was convicted of multiple offences because he was recording them on his mobile phone. It really is despicable, and mostly because the victims almost black out, or they do black out to the point where when they wake up, they don't actually know what's happened to them. Thank goodness Leah had friends with her and they had the foresight to obviously phone Leah's mum. But, my concern is for other vulnerable victims out there, particularly university students who seem to be targeted in this way. And we need to make sure that we are keeping this alive. We are talking about it. GMTV covering it is fantastic because we need to where they need to...
I couldn't agree more. We've got to get daylight in on this. Let's talk to the Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna Jones.
No, that is Donna Jones.
I beg your pardon? Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry, yeah. Michael Kill. Got Michael.
OK, no, let's talk to Michael Kill, who's from the Nighttime Industries Association. Michael Kill, the concern, of course, for you and your members is this seems to be happening on your premises, those of your members. And we know that thousands of students in Scotland are planning to boycott bars and nightclubs in protest at what is happening, sort of laying the responsibility really at the owners of those venues' feet, isn't it? I mean, what can be done to stop this happening? Do you check that people aren't carrying needles of some kind in? It must be quite hard to do that. But is that what you're going to have to do?
And thank you. And just to reiterate, I mean, this is a heinous crime, and the information that's still coming out at the moment with regard to the needle stick issue is still emanates. So we're still trying to understand and liaising with the police, and particularly the MPCC. But without a doubt, we are doing an immense amount of work right the way across the country, including the devolved governments, to ensure that we are putting some very clear safety protocols in place, enhanced searching, communication, raising awareness, staff training, revisiting our duty of care protocols. So there's a lot of work that's going into it at the moment, and definitely on a regional basis, there are some clear protocols that are being put in place.
OK, let's just focus on that. So enhanced searching. Do you have the right to search someone's bag and person in case they're carrying some form of needle?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, obviously with their consent. I mean, we do not have the powers of the police, without a doubt, but we do very effectively search on entry. The challenge that we have is there are places where people can hide things, and that's where the challenge lies, and the barriers between sort of finding things and our searching protocol. But many places up and down the country have it as part of the conditions on their licence.
Okay. Don't worry, we've all been there. We'll let that ring out. OK. What can potential victims do to protect themselves? I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of advice about avoiding having having your drink spiked by keeping it with you, keeping your hand over it, lots of things that people can do in clubs with their drinks to keep an eye on them and keep them close. How can you guard against being spiked like this? Do you have any tips at all for people going to these clubs?
Well, it's very difficult. We're liaising with the police at the moment to understand how they're being administered. We're working very closely with some of the victims to understand exactly their experiences, and we're sharing that nationally with the industry. And we're collectively trying to get to a position where we can put some very clear protocols in place. But I think that the key thing that we need to pass to people is that they are aware of their surroundings, aware of their drinks, so aware of people around them. Yes. And anyone that doesn't feel right approaches our staff and our security so that they can be supported and helped. And we are looking at additional medical provision within venues as well, which will aid dealing with those situations.
Can we just quickly come back to Gemma? Gemma, as I said at the outset, your drink was spiked. Presumably you were taking precautions. You were trying to keep an eye on it. Any idea what happened?
I didn't really piece together that I'd been spiked until the next day, where I couldn't remember at all how I got home. I was in London at the time. I didn't know if I got a taxi home or I got the train, which was immediately a big flag up in my mind. But on the night, I don't think I could have had any idea. And I was lucky that I was with a good friend who noticed that I was in trouble, and she just straight away put me in a taxi. No questions asked.
But had you been taking precautions? Obviously you're aware of the risk of drinks being spiked. Had you been trying to protect your drink? Had you kept your hand over it? Had you kept it with you? Do you remember that? Yeah,
well, it's sort of second nature now, because we've been told for so long that we need to be careful of who's near our drinks. So if I did leave it, it was left with my friend, and it was watch my drink, and we were sat at a table and it wasn't particularly busy where we were sat. So it's still a bit of a mystery as to how it happened, but you see people finding opportunities wherever they can, and all it would have taken was one tiny distraction. And
and honestly, Gemma, I mean, it's not your responsibility to take the precautions to stop someone who does maliciously put something in your drink. I mean, how on earth anybody is expected to constantly watch a drink? I don't know. But Gemma, it must have been completely upsetting for you. Firstly, you experienced that in August, and then a couple of months later, your little sister also experiences it in a different way. I mean, horrible for both of you, but you must have thought, what on earth's going on? It doesn't just happen to you, it happens to your little sister as well.
I think when it happened to me, I was more scared, but then when it happened to my sister, it just made me really angry that she'd never been out clubbing really before. Yeah. And it was obviously someone taking advantage of that in the first place. And then the fact that someone would do that to my little sister and sort of taint this idea of going out and enjoying her freshers just made me feel even more sick.
I'm sure it did. Look, can we just come back to Donna Jones? Donna, sorry, I got you muddled earlier. There are some reports that these injections are being administered by EpiPens, which are obviously quite easy to conceal when people go into clubs. How would that be possible? Because EpiPens are kind of sealed units, aren't they? They'd have to be really quite heavily tampered with, wouldn't they?
I don't have the knowledge around exactly how these are being administered right now. And I do think the point that was made is it's very, very difficult, even if you've got enhanced searches. If someone has that criminal intent in their mind to go out and drug somebody, or with it, whether it be something in their drink or by, injecting them in some way, it's almost impossible. You could conceal that in your shoe, in your sock, in your underwear, perhaps. So I really think that this is a much wider societal issue, that we have got people in this country that will go out and prey on vulnerable people. As I say, students who've moved to a new city are the top target from what we can see at the moment, to try and drug them and to assault them in some way or do something with them that they shouldn't. I've been in contact.
Do you think maybe we need more CCTV cameras in these places so we can actually get these people on camera, identify them, and bring around a few short, sharp prosecutions to set an example?
I think the solution here is reporting. Often where you've got nightclubs, pubs, bars, nighttime economy locations, there is lots and lots of CCTV. But very often, as we've just heard there, the victim wakes up in the morning not knowing what's happened, and then they feel slightly odd by calling the police to say, I think something might have happened to me. I've been in contact with a victim called B. Goldsmith. She's written a book called Diary of a Date Rape. And she was in London. She had her drink spiked. She was out on a date with somebody she dated 5 or 6 times. And it's only because she went to the toilet and on the way back, another man said to her, that guy's not a good guy. You shouldn't be with him. He's put something in your drink. Now, she took no notice of it, carried on with the evening, woke up and thought, was it planning to go home after the date, woke up the next morning in a hotel room, feeling like she had had sex with her underwear off on her own in a hotel. She didn't even know whereabouts in London she was. And when she woke up that next morning, because she didn't know what had happened to her, although she had a strong suspicion something had happened, she didn't report it to the police. Now, I would urge anybody who can't remember how they got home to the point they think they've been either, with a needle or being drink spiked, please report it to the police. There is CCTV, as I say, in most nighttime economies across the country. Yep. The police need to know about these reports. That is the way that we can stop this, is, as you say, Richard, with the successful prosecutions.
Well, that is a very cautionary tale, actually, to end this item with. Thank you very much. I'm very glad that we've done this story today. It's clearly a very important issue that we've really got to tackle head on. Thank you very much indeed, all of you.